Vasishta's Yoga, Part 5 on Dissolution. Valmiki said to Arishtanim, the people listened to sage Vasishta's words of wisdom with total attention. The Emperor Dasharatha and his minister had for the time being abandoned their royal preoccupations and pleasures, intent on absorbing the teachings of the sage. At noon, the conches gave the time signal and the assembly rose for the midday interval. In the evening, the congregation was given leave to retire for the day. And as the kings and the princes rose to leave the court, their dazzling ornaments illumined it. The court itself appeared to be a miniature universe. When the assembly had thus dispersed, the king Dasharatha duly worshipped the sages and received their blessings. After this, Vasishta gave leave to the princes Rama and his brothers to retire for the day. They too fell at the sage's feet and received his blessings. When night fell, all except Rama retired to bed. But Rama could not sleep. Rama contemplated the illuminating words of the sage Vasishta thus: what is this world appearance? Who are all these different kinds of people and other beings? How do they appear here? From where do they come and where do they go? What is the nature of the mind and how does it attain quiescence? How did this cosmic illusion arise in the first place and how does it come to an end? Again, is such an end to this illusion desirable or undesirable? How has limitation entered into the infinite self? What exactly are the means that the sage Vasishta has prescribed for the conquest of the senses and the mind? They are surely the sources of sorrow. It is impossible to abandon enjoyment of pleasure, and it is not possible to end sorrow without abandoning such enjoyment. This indeed is a problem. But since the mind is the crucial factor in all this, surely if the mind once tastes the supreme peace, freed of all world illusion, it will not abandon that and run after sense pleasure. Oh, when will my mind be pure and when will it rest in the Supreme Being? When will my mind rest in the infinite even as a wave is reabsorbed in the ocean? When will I be free of all craving? When will I be blessed with equal vision? When will I be rid of this terrible fever of worldliness? O mind, will you really remain firmly established in the wisdom revealed by the great sages? O mind, O intellect, you are my friend. Contemplate the teachings of sage Vasishta in such a way that we shall both be saved from the miseries of the world existence. Valmiki continued. When the day dawned, Rama and the others got up and performed their morning religious functions, Sandhya Vandanam, and went over to the residence of the sage Vasishta. The sage himself had by then concluded his own dawn prayers and was in deep meditation. When he rose, he and others ascended a chariot and drove to the palace of King Dasharatha. As they entered the royal court, the king walked 3 paces to receive them with due honor. Soon after this, all the other members of the assembly entered the assembly and took up their respective places. Opening the day's proceedings, Dasharatha said, O blessed Lord, I hope you have thoroughly recovered from the strain of yesterday's discourse. For our part, we feel highly elevated by the words of supreme wisdom that you uttered yesterday. Surely the words of enlightened sages dispel the sorrows of all beings and bestow bliss upon them. They drive away the impurities caused in us by our own evil deeds. The evil tendencies like craving, greed, etc. are weakened by your wisdom. Our deluded belief in the reality of this world appearance is also provided with a powerful challenge. O Rama, only that day on which such sages are worshipped can be regarded as fruitful. The other days are of darkness. This is your best opportunity. Inquire and learn from the sage that which is worth learning. Vasishta said, O Rama, have you deeply contemplated the teachings I have communicated to you? Did you reflect over them during the night and have you inscribed them on the tablet of your heart? Do you remember that I said to you that the mind is man? Do you remember what I said about the creation of this universe and in all its details? For it is only by frequent remembrance of such teachings that they attain clarity. Rama said, Lord, I have indeed done just that. Giving up sleep, I have spent the whole night meditating upon your enlightening words, endeavoring to see the truth that the words pointed to. Thus have I enshrined that truth in my heart. Who will not bear your teachings on his head, knowing that they confer the highest bliss on him? At the same time, they are extremely sweet to hear. They promote every type of auspiciousness and they bring us the incomparable experience. Hence, I pray, resume your most excellent discourse. Vasishta said, O Rama, Kindly listen to this discourse on the dissolution of the universe and the attainment of supreme peace. This seemingly unending world appearance is sustained by Rajasa and Tamasa beings, even as a superstructure is sustained by pillars. But it is playfully and easily abandoned by those who are of pure nature, even as the skin is effortlessly abandoned by a snake. They who are of pure nature and they whose activities are based on purity and light do not live their life mechanically, but inquire into the origin and the nature of this world appearance. When such inquiry is conducted with the help of the right study of scriptures and the company of holy ones, there arises a clear understanding within oneself in which the truth is seen as in the light of a lamp. Not until the truth is perceived by oneself for oneself through such inquiry is the truth seen truly. O Rama, you are indeed of a pure nature. Therefore, inquire into the nature of the truth and the falsehood, and be devoted to the truth. That which was not in the beginning, and which will cease to be after a time, how can that be regarded as truth? That alone can be regarded as the truth which has always been and which will always be. Birth is of the mind, and growth is mental too. And when the truth is clearly seen, it is mind that is liberated from its own ignorance. Hence, let the mind be led along the path of righteousness by the prior study of the scriptures, company of the holy ones, and the cultivation of dispassion. Equipped with these, one should resort to the feet of a master whose wisdom is perfected. By faithfully adhering to the teachings of the master, one gradually attains to the plane of total purity. Rama, behold the self by the self through the pure inquiry, even as the cool moon perceives the entire space. One is tossed around over the waters of this illusory world appearance like a piece of straw, only as long as one does not get into the secure boat of self-inquiry. Even as particles of sand floating in water settle down when the water is absolutely steady, the mind of the man who has gained this knowledge of the truth settles down in total peace. Once this knowledge of the truth is gained, it is not lost. Even if a piece of gold has lain in a heap of ashes, the goldsmith finds no problem seeing it. When the truth has not been known, there may be confusion. But once it is known, there can be no confusion. Ignorance of the self is the cause of your sorrow. Knowledge of the self leads to delight and tranquility. Vasishta continued. Resolve the confusion between the body and the self. You will be at peace at once. Even as a nugget of gold fallen into a mud is never spoiled by the mud, the self is untainted by the body. I repeat, with uplifted arms I proclaim, the self is one thing and the body is another, even as the water and the lotus. But no one listens to aim. As long as the inert and insentient mind pursues the path of pleasure, so long this darkness of world illusion cannot be dispelled. But the moment one awakens from this and inquires into the nature of the self, this darkness is dispelled at once. Hence, one should constantly endeavor to awaken the mind which dwells in the body in order that one may go beyond the process of becoming, for such becoming is fraught with sorrow. Even as the sky is not affected by the dust particles floating in it, the self is unaffected by the body. Pleasure and pain are falsely imagined to be experienced by oneself. Even as one falsely thinks that the sky is polluted by dust, in fact, pleasure and pain are neither of the body nor of the self, which transcends everything. They belong only to ignorance. Their loss is no loss. Neither pleasure nor pain belong to anyone. All indeed is the self which is supreme peace and infinite. Realize this, O Rama. The self and the world are neither identical nor are they different. All this is but the reflection of the truth. Nothing but the one Brahman exists. I am different from this is pure fancy. Give it up. The one self perceives itself within itself as the infinite consciousness. Therefore, there is no sorrow, no delusion, no birth, no creature. Whatever is, is. Be free from distress, O Rama. Be free of duality. Remain firmly established in the self, abandoning even concern for your own welfare. Be at peace within with a steady mind. Let there be no sorrow in your mind. Rest in the inner silence. Remain alone without self-willed thoughts. Be brave, having conquered the mind and the senses. Be desireless, content with what comes to you unsought. Live effortlessly, without grabbing or giving up anything. Be free from all mental perversions and from the blinding taint of illusion. Rest content in your own self. Thus be free from all distress. Remain in an expansive state in the self like the full ocean. Rejoice in the self by the self like the blissful rays of the full moon. Vasishta continued, O Rama, he who knows that all the activities merely happen because of the mere existence of consciousness, even as a crystal reflects the objects around it without intending to do so, is liberated. They who, even after taking this human birth, are not interested in such non-volitional activity, go from heaven to hell and from hell to heaven again. Some there are who are devoted to inaction, having turned away from or suppressed all action. They go from hell to hell, from sorrow to sorrow, from fear to fear. Some are bound by the tendencies and intentions to the fruits of their own actions, and they take birth as worms and vermin, then as trees and plants, then as worms and vermin again. Others there are who know the self, blessed indeed are they have carefully inquired into the nature of the mind and overcome all cravings. They go to the higher planes of consciousness. He who has taken birth for the last time now is endowed with a mixture of light and a little impurity. Right from birth he grows in holiness. The nobler type of knowledge enters into him with ease. All the noble qualities like friendliness, compassion, wisdom, goodness, and magnanimity seek him and take their abode in him. He performs all appropriate actions but is not swayed if the results appear to be gain or loss, nor does he feel elated or depressed. His heart is clear. He is much sought after by the people. Such a one who is full of noble qualities seeks and follows an enlightened master who directs him along the path of self-knowledge. He then realizes the self which is the one cosmic being. Such a liberated one awakens the inner intelligence, which has been asleep so far. And this awakened intelligence instantly knows itself to be the infinite consciousness. Becoming constantly aware of the inner light, such a blessed one instantly ascends into the utterly pure state. Such is the normal course of evolution, O Rama. However, there are exceptions to this rule. In the case of those who have taken birth in this world, two possibilities exist for the attainment of liberation. The first is treading the path indicated by the Master, the seeker gradually reaches the goal of liberation. The second is self-knowledge literally drops into one's lap, as it were, and there is spontaneous enlightenment. I shall narrate to you an ancient legend which illustrates the second type of enlightenment. Please listen. Vasishta's Yoga, Part 5 on Dissolution, the story of King Janaka. Vasishta continued, O Rama, there is a great monarch whose vision is unlimited, who rules over the Videha territory. He is known as Janaka. To those who seek his aid, he is a cornucopia. In his very presence, the hot lotuses of his friends blossom. He is like unto a son for them. He is a great benefactor to all good people. One day he went to a pleasure garden where he roamed freely. While he was thus roaming, he heard the inspiring words uttered by certain holy perfected sages. Thus did the perfected sages sing. We contemplate that self which reveals itself as a pure experience of bliss when seer comes into contact with the object without a division or conceptualization. We contemplate the self in which objects are reflected non-volitionally once the divided experience of subject, object, and the intention or volition that created this division have ceased. We contemplate that light that illumines all that shines, the self that transcends the twin concept of is and is not, and which therefore is in the middle of the two sides, as it were. We contemplate that reality in which everything exists, to which everything belongs, from which everything has emerged, which is the cause of everything and which is everything. We contemplate the self which is the very basis of all language and expression, being the alpha and the omega, which covers the entire field from A to Ha, and which is indicated by the word aham, I. Alas, people run after other objects, foolishly giving up the Lord who dwells in the cave of one's own heart. He who, having known the worthlessness of the objects, still remains bound at heart to them, is not a human being. One should strike down every craving with the rod of wisdom, whether that craving has arisen or is about to rise in the heart. One should enjoy the delight that flows from peace. The man whose mind is well controlled is firmly established in peace. When the heart is thus established in peace, there arises the pure bliss of the self without delay. Vasishta continued. Having heard the words of the sages, King Janaka became terribly depressed. With the utmost expedition, he retraced his steps to the palace. Quickly dismissing all his attendants, he sought the seclusion of his own chamber. In a mood of intense anguish, King Janaka said to himself, Alas, alas, I am helplessly swinging like a stone in this world of misery. What is the duration of a lifespan in eternity? Yet I have developed a love for it. Fire on the mind. What is sovereignty even during a whole lifetime? Yet, like a fool, I think I cannot do without it. This lifespan of mine is but a trivial moment, eternity stretches before and after it. How shall I cherish it now? Ah, who is that magician who has spread this illusion called the world and thus deluded me? How is it that I am so deluded? Realizing that what is near and what is far is all in my mind, I shall give up the apprehension of all external objects. Knowing that all the busyness in this world leads only to endless suffering, what hope shall I cherish for happiness? Day after day, month after month, year after year, moment after moment, I see happiness comes to me, bearing sorrow, and sorrow comes to me again and again. Whatever is seen or experienced here is subject to change and destruction. There is nothing whatsoever in this world which the wise would rely on. They who are exalted today are trodden under foot tomorrow. O foolish mind, what shall we trust in this world? Alas, I am bound without a cord, I am tainted without impurity, I am fallen, though remaining at the top. O myself, what a mystery! Even as the ever brilliant sun suddenly faces a cloud floating in front of him, I find this strange delusion mysteriously floating towards me. Who are these friends and relatives? What are these pleasures? Even as a boy seeing a ghost is frightened, I am deluded by these fanciful relatives. Knowing all such relatives as cords that bind me to this old age, death, etc., I still cling to them. Let these relatives continue or perish. What is it to me? Great events and great men have come and gone, leaving just a memory behind. On what shall one place reliance even now? Even the gods and the Trinity have come and gone a million times. What is permanent in this universe? It is vain hope that binds one to this nightmare known as world appearance. Why on this wretched condition? King Janaka continued, I am like an ignorant fool deluded by the goblin known as the ego sense, which creates the false feeling I am such and such, or I am so and so. Knowing full well that time has trampled underfoot countless gods and trinities, I shall still entertain my love for life. Days and nights are spent in vain cravings, but not in experience of the bliss of the infinite consciousness. I have gone from sorrow to greater sorrow, but dispassion does not arise in me. What shall I regard as excellent or desirable, seeing that whatever one cherished in the world has passed away, leaving one miserable? Day by day, people in this world grow in sin and violence. Hence, day by day, they experience greater sorrow. Childhood is wasted in ignorance, youth is wasted in lusting after pleasures, and the rest of one's life is spent in family worries. What does a stupid person achieve in this life? Even if one performs great religious rites, one may go to heaven, nothing more. What is heaven? Is it on earth or in the netherworld? And is there a place which is untouched by affliction? Sorrow brings happiness, and happiness brings sorrow on its shoulders. The pores of the earth are filled by the dead bodies of beings, hence it looks solid. There are beings in this universe whose winking is of the duration of an epoch. What is my lifespan in comparison? Of course, there appear to be delightful and enduring objects in this world, but they bring with them endless worries and anxieties. Prosperity is truly adversity, and adversity may be desirable depending upon the effect upon mind. Mind alone is a seed for this delusion of world appearance. It is the mind that gives rise to the false sense of I and mine. In this world, which appears to have been created even as the fruit of coconut palm might appear to have been dislodged by a crow which coincidentally happens to alight on the tree at that moment, sheer ignorance generates feelings like this I should have and this I should reject. It is better to spend one's time in seclusion or in hell than to live in the world appearance. Intention or motivation alone is the seed for this world appearance. I shall dry up this motivation. I have enjoyed and suffered all kinds of experiences. Now I shall rest. I shall not grieve any more. I have been awakened. I shall slay this thief, the mind who has stolen my wisdom. I have been well instructed by the sages. Now I shall seek self-knowledge. Vasishta continued. Seeing the king thus seated engrossed in deep contemplation, his bodyguard respectfully approached him and said, Lord, it is time to consider your royal duties. Your Majesty's handmaiden awaits your pleasure, having prepared your perfumed bath. The holy priests await your arrival in the bath chamber to commence the chanting of the appropriate hymns. Lord, arise and let what has to be done, for noble men are never unpunctual or negligent. But the king ignored the bodyguard's words and continued to muse. What shall I do with this court and the royal duties when I know that all these are ephemeral? They are useless to me. I shall renounce all activities and duties, and I shall remain immersed in the bliss of the self. O mind, abandon your cravings for sense pleasure so that you may be rid of the miseries of repeated old age and death. Whatever be the condition in which you hope to enjoy happiness, that very condition proves to be the source of unhappiness. Enough of this sinful conditioned pleasure-seeking life. Seek the delight that is natural and inherent in you. Seeing that the king was silent, the bodyguard became silent too. The king once again said to himself, what shall I seek to gain in this universe? On what eternal truth in this universe shall I rest with confidence? What difference does it make if I am engaged in ceaseless activity or if I remain idle? Nothing in this world is truly enduring in any case, whether active or idle. This body is impermanent and ever changing. When the intelligence is rooted in equanimity, what is lost and have? I do not long for what I do not have, nor do I desire to abandon what has come to me unsought. I am firmly established in the self. Let what is mine be mine. There is nothing that I should work for, nor is there any meaning in inaction. Whatever is gained by action or by inaction is false. When the mind is thus established in desirelessness, when it does not seek pleasure, when the body and its limbs perform their natural functions, action and inaction are of equal value or meaning. Hence, let the body engage itself in its natural functions. Without such activity, the body will integrate, the body will disintegrate. When the mind ceases to entertain the notions, I do this, I enjoy this, in regard to the actions thus performed, action becomes non-action. Renouncing of action consciously is inaction, not non-action. But when you perform the duties that are supposed to be done by the body with the least sense of doership, without entertaining notions like I do this, I enjoy this, that is the recommended action, which is called non-action. Action without the doership. Vasishta continued. Reflecting thus, King Janaka rose from the seat as the sun rises in the horizon and began to engage himself in the royal duties, without any attachment to them. Having abandoned all concepts of the desirable and the undesirable, freed from all psychological conditioning and intention, he engaged himself in spontaneous and appropriate action as if in deep sleep. Though wide awake, he performed the day's tasks, including the adoration of the holy ones. And at the conclusion of the day, he retired to his own seclusion to spend the night in deep meditation, which was easy and natural to him. His mind naturally turned away from all confusion and delusion, and had become firmly established in equanimity. And when he rose in the morning, King Janaka thus reflected in his own mind. O unsteady mind, the worldly life is not conducive to your true happiness. Hence reach the state of equanimity. It is in such equanimity that you will experience peace, bliss, and the truth. Whenever you create perverse thinking in yourself out of your wantonness, it is then that this world illusion begins to expand and spread out. It is when you entertain desire for pleasure that this world illusion sprouts countless branches. It is thought that gives rise to the network of world appearance. Hence, abandon this whim and fancy and attain to equanimity. Weigh in the balance of your wisdom the sense pleasures on one side and the bliss of peace on the other. Whatever you determine to be the truth, seek that. Give up all hopes and expectations, and freed from the wish to seek or to abandon, roam about freely. Let this world appearance be real or unreal. Let it arise or set, but do not let its merits and demerits disturb your equanimity. For at no time do you have a real relationship with this world appearance. It is only because of your ignorance that such relationship has appeared in you. O mind, you are false, and this world appearance is also false. Hence, there is a mysterious relationship between you two, like the relationship between the barren woman and her son. If you think that you are real and that the world is unreal, how can a valid relationship exist between the two? On the other hand, if both are real, where then is the justification for exultation and sorrow? Hence, abandon sorrow and resort to deep contemplation. There is nothing here in this world which can lead you to the state of fullness. Hence, resolutely take refuge in courage and endurance, and overcome your own waywardness. Vasishta continued, having reached the understanding already described, Janaka functioned as the king and did all that was necessary without getting befuddled and with a great strength of mind and spirit. His mind was not distracted by royal pleasures. In fact, he moved about as if he were continually in a state of deep sleep. From then on, he was interested neither in accumulating nor in rejecting anything. Without any doubt or confusion, he lived in the present. His wisdom was uninterrupted, and his intelligence did not become clouded again by impurities. The light of self-knowledge arose in the heart free from the least taint of impurity and sorrow, even as the sun rises on the horizon. He beheld everything in the universe as existing in cosmic power. Endowed with the self-knowledge, he saw all things in the self which is infinite. Knowing that all that happens naturally, he neither experienced elation nor suffered depression, and remained in unbroken equanimity. Janaka had become a liberated one while still living. Janaka continued to rule the kingdom without his self-knowledge settling or rising again on account of the influence of the evil or the good prevalent around him. Remaining forever in the consciousness of the infinite, he experienced the state of non-action, even though he appeared to others to be ever busy in diverse actions. All his tendencies and intentions had ceased to be. Hence, though he appeared to be active, he was really in a state of deep sleep all the time. He did not brood over the past, nor did he worry over the future. He lived in the present moment, smiling happily all the time. Janaka attained whatever he did by dint of his own enquiry. Similarly, one should pursue the inquiry into the nature of truth till one reaches the very limits of such inquiry. Self-knowledge or knowledge of truth is not had by resorting to a guru, nor by the study of scripture, nor by good works. It is attained only by means of inquiry inspired by the company of wise and holy men. One's inner light alone is the means, nothing else. When this inner light is kept alive, it is not affected by the darkness of inertia. Vasishta continued, whatever sorrows there may be that seem to be difficult to overcome are easily crossed over with the help of the boat of wisdom. He who is devoid of this wisdom is bothered even by minor difficulties, but he who has this wisdom, even if he is alone and helpless in the world, and even if he is unlearned in the scriptures, easily crosses the sea of sorrow. Even without the help of another, the man of wisdom accomplishes his work. He who is without wisdom does not. Even his capital is lost. Hence, one should constantly endeavor to gain this inner light or wisdom. Even as one who aspires for fruits exerts constant effort in his garden, wisdom is the root which, when thus constantly nourished, yields the good fruits of self-knowledge. The effort and the energy that are directed by the people in the worldly activities should first be directed to the gaining of this wisdom. One should first destroy the dullness of wit, which is the source of all sorrow and calamities, and which is the seed for this huge tree of world appearance. And whatever is gained in heaven or in the nether world or by empires here is gained by wisdom here and now. By wisdom is this ocean of world appearance crossed over, not by charity, not by pilgrimage, nor by austerities. Those men who are endowed with the divine virtues here gained them through wisdom. Even kings have gained their throne through wisdom. Wisdom is surely the path to heaven as well as to supreme good or liberation. It is by wisdom alone that a meek scholar wins in a contest against a powerful adversary. Wisdom, or the inner light, is like the legendary precious stone. O Rama, that precious stone which bestows on its owner whatever he wishes to have. He who has this wisdom reaches the other shore of the world illusion easily. He who does not have this wisdom drowns in world illusion. When one's intelligence and understanding are properly guided by this inner light, one reaches the other shore. If not, one is overcome by obstacles. Defects, desires, and evils do not even approach that man of wisdom whose mind is undeluded. Through wisdom, the entire world is clearly seen as it is. Neither good fortune nor misfortune even approach one who has such clear vision. Even as the dense dark cloud that veils the sun is dispersed by wind, the darkness of ego sense which veils the self is dispelled by wisdom. He who seeks to be established in the highest state of consciousness should first purify his mind by the cultivation of wisdom or by the kindling of the inner light, even as one who desires food grains tills the field. Vasishta continued, O Rama, thus do inquire into the nature of self, even as Janaka did. Then you will reach without any obstacle whatsoever that realms of the knowers of what is to be known. Again and again, one should overcome the enemies known as the senses, and then the self attains self satisfaction by its own endeavor. When thus the infinite self is realized, sorrows come to an end. Even the seeds of delusion are destroyed. The shower of misfortune ceases, and the perception of evil ends. Hence, be like Janaka and realize the self in the inner light. Be an excellent person. If one engages oneself in constant self-inquiry and sees the ever-changing nature of the world, in due time one will attain self-knowledge like Janaka. Neither God, nor rites and rituals, nor wealth, nor relatives are of any use in this. To those who are afraid of the world illusion, self-effort as self-inquiry alone is capable of bringing about self-knowledge. Please do not follow the teachings of those deluded ones who depend upon gods, various rites and routine actions, and such other perverse practices. This ocean of world appearance can be crossed only when you are firmly established in supreme wisdom. When you see the self with the self alone, and when your intelligence is not diverted or colored by sense perceptions. Thus have I narrated to you how King Janaka attained self-knowledge as if by an act of grace which caused the knowledge to drop from heaven as it were. One who cultivates the wisdom that Janaka had will experience the inner light in his own heart, and the ignorant fancy of world illusion will be instantly dispelled. When the limited and conditioned feeling, I am such and such or I am so and so, ceases, there arises consciousness of the all-pervading infinite. Hence, O Rama, like Janaka, you to abandon the false and fanciful notion of the ego sense within your heart. When this ego sense is dispelled, the supreme light of self-knowledge will surely shine in your heart. This ego sense alone is the densest form of darkness. When it is dispelled, the inner light shines by itself. He who knows I am not, nor does the other exist, nor is there non-existence, and whose mental activity has thus come to a standstill, is not engrossed in acquisitiveness. There is no bondage here other than craving for acquisition and the anxiety to avoid what one considers undesirable. Do not succumb to such anxiety, and do not let acquisition of what is considered desirable be your goal. Giving up both these attitudes, craving and aversion, rest in what remains. Vasishta continued. They in whom the twin urges of acquisition and rejection have come to an end do not desire anything, nor do they renounce anything. The mind does not reach the state of utter tranquility till these two impulses have been eliminated. Even so, as long as one feels this is real and this is unreal, the mind does not experience peace and equilibrium. How can equanimity, purity, or dispassion arise in the mind of one who is swayed by thoughts of this is right, that is wrong, this is gain, that is loss, when there is only one Brahman, which is one without the second? What can be said to be right and what wrong? As long as the mind is swayed by thoughts of the desirable and the undesirable, there cannot be equanimity. Desirelessness, fearlessness, unchanging steadiness, equanimity, wisdom, non-attachment, non-action, goodness, total absence of perversion, courage, endurance, friendliness, intelligence, contentment, gentleness, pleasant speech, all these qualities are natural to one who is free from the instincts of acquisition and rejection. And even those qualities are non-intentional and spontaneous. One should restrain the mind from flowing downward, even as the flow of river is blocked by the construction of a dam. After having firmly abandoned all contact with external objects, turn the mind within and reflect over everything within yourself, even while engaged in various activities. With the help of this sharp sword of wisdom, cut through this network of conditioning, which alone is the cause of the stream of world appearance. Cut down the mind with the mind itself. Having reached the state of purity, remain established in it right now. Cut the mind down with the mind and dismiss the thought of the mind which thus negates the mind. Thus will you have finally destroyed the world appearance. When thus the world appearance has been eliminated, delusion will not arise again and the mind will not create the world appearance again either. Though appearing to function in this world, be firmly rooted in the awareness of the unreality of all this, and thus give up all hopes and expectations. Rooted in equanimity, doing whatever happens to be the appropriate action in each given situation, and not even thinking about what has thus befallen you unsought, live a non-volitional life here. even as the Lord may be said to be both the doer and the non-doer of all actions. Here, you too live non-volitionally, doing yet not doing what has to be done. Vasishta continued, "You are the knower of all the self. You are the unborn being. You are the Supreme Lord. You are non-different from the self which pervades everything. He who has abandoned the idea that there is an object of perception which is other than the self is not subjected to the defects born of joy and grief. He is known as a yogi who is freed from attraction and aversion, to whom a clod of earth and a nugget of gold are of equal value and importance, and who has given up all the tendencies which confirm the world appearance. Whatever he does, whatever he enjoys, whatever he gives, and whatever he destroys, his consciousness is free and therefore equanimous in pain and pleasure, doing whatever has to be done without the division into the desirable and the undesirable. He who engages himself in action does not drown in it. He who is confirmed in his conviction that the infinite consciousness alone exists is instantly freed from thoughts of pleasure and is therefore tranquil and self-controlled. The mind is by nature inert. It borrows intelligence from the consciousness which it pursues in order to gain the ability to experience. The mind thus comes into contact with whatever has been brought into being by the power or energy of consciousness. Thus, the mind exists by the grace of consciousness, as it were, and it entertains various thoughts on account of its perception of this universe. The consciousness alone is its light. Otherwise, how does the inert mind function intelligently? They who are well versed in the scriptures declare that the fictitious movement of energy in consciousness is known as the mind, and the expression of the mind are known as thoughts or ideas. Consciousness minus conceptualization is the eternal Brahman, the Absolute. Consciousness plus conceptualization is thought. A small part of it, as it were, is seated in the heart as a reality. This is known as the finite intelligence or individualized consciousness. However, this limited consciousness soon forgot its own essential conscious nature and continued to be but inert. It then became the thinking faculty with the reception and rejection as its inherent tendencies. In fact, it is the infinite consciousness alone that has become all this, but until it awakes to its infinite nature, it does not know itself in self-knowledge. Hence, the mind should be awakened by means of inquiry based on scriptures, dispassion, and control of the senses. This intelligence, when it is thus awakened, shines as Brahman the Absolute, or else it continues to experience this finite world in ignorance. Vasishta continued, when this inner intelligence is not awakened, it does not really know or understand anything, and what appears to be known through the thoughts is of course not the reality. These thoughts themselves derive their value from consciousness even as a receptacle derives its scent from the incense kept in it. On account of this borrowed intelligence, thought is able to know a minute fragmented fraction of this cosmic consciousness. The mind blossoms fully only when the light of the infinite shines upon it. Otherwise, though appearing to be intelligent, thought is unable to comprehend anything really, even as the granite figure of a dancer does not dance even when requested to do so. Can a battle scene painted on a canvas generate the roar of the fighting armies? Can a corpse get up and run? Does the figure of the sun carved on a rock dispel darkness? Similarly, what can the inert mind do? Even as the mirage appears to be flowing water only when the sun shines, the mind appears to be intelligent and active only because of the inner light of consciousness. Ignorant people misconstrue the movement of prana to be the mind, but in fact it is nothing more than the prana or life force. But in the case of those whose intelligence is not fragmented or conditioned by thoughts, it is surely the radiance of the Supreme Being of Self. The intelligence that identifies itself with certain movements of prana in the self is known as the jiva or the living soul. Intelligence, mind, jiva are just names which are used even by wise men. Such entities are not real. However, from the absolute point of view, in truth, there is no mind, no intelligence, no embodied being. The self alone exists at all times. The self alone is the world, the self alone is time, and also the evolutionary process. Because it is extremely subtle, it seems not to exist, though it exists. While appearing to be a reflection or appearance, it is also realized to be the truth. But the self is beyond all these descriptions, and its truth can only be experienced directly by self-knowledge. When the inner light begins to shine, the mind ceases to be. Even as when there is light, darkness vanishes. On the other hand, when consciousness is objectified in an effort to experience the objects of the senses, the self is forgotten, as it were, and there arise thoughts concerning the creatures of the mind. Vasishta continued, a thought arising in the Supreme Being is known as individual consciousness. When this consciousness is freed from thought and individuation, there is liberation. The seed or the sole cause for this world appearance is but the rising of a thought in the infinite consciousness, which gave rise to the limited finite individual consciousness. When consciousness thus moved away from its utterly quiescent state and became tainted, as it were, from thought, the thinking faculty arose, and with it the mind thought of the universe. By the control of the prana, the mind is also restrained, even as the shadow ceases when the substance is removed. The mind ceases when the prana is restrained. It is because of the movement of the life force that one remembers the experiences one had elsewhere. It is known as mind because it thus experiences movements of life force. The life force is restrained by the following means: by dispassion, by the practice of pranayama, or by the practice of inquiry into the cause of the movement of the prana, by the ending of sorrow through intelligent means, and by the direct knowledge or experience of the Supreme Truth. It is possible for the mind to assume the existence of intelligence in a stone, but the mind does not possess the least intelligence. Movements belong to the prana, which is inert. Intelligence, or the power of consciousness, belongs to the self, from where the mind borrows the consciousness. The self is pure and eternally omnipresent. It is the mind that fancies a relationship between these two factors. But such fancy is false, and hence all knowledge that arises from this false relationship is also false. This is known as ignorance, as Maya or cosmic illusion, which gives rise to the dreadful poison known as world appearance. This relationship between the prana and consciousness is imaginary. If it is not so imagined, there can be no world appearance. The relationship between the prana and consciousness is imaginary. The prana, by its association with consciousness, becomes conscious and experiences the world as its object. But all this is unreal as the experience of a ghost by a child. The movement within the infinite consciousness alone is the truth. Can this infinite consciousness be affected by any finite factor? In other words, can an inferior entity overwhelm a superior one? Hence, in truth, there is no mind or finite consciousness. When this truth is clearly understood, that which was falsely imagined as the mind comes to an end. It appeared to be because of imperfect understanding. When this misunderstanding ceases, the mind also ceases to be. Vasishta continued, the mind is inert and is not a real entity. Hence it is forever dead. Yet, beings in this world are killed by this dead thing. How mysterious is this stupidity? The mind has no self, no body, no support, no form, yet by this mind is everything consumed in this world. This indeed is a great mystery. He who says that he is destroyed by the mind which has no substantiality at all, says in effect that his head was smashed by the lotus petal. To say that one can be hurt by the mind which is inert, dumb, and blind is like saying that one is roasted by the heat of the full moon. The hero who is able to destroy a real enemy standing in front of him is himself destroyed by this mind which does not even exist. What is the power of that which has been put together by thought, whose very existence is false, and which is found to be non-existence when its existence is inquired into? Stupidity and ignorance alone are the sources of all sorrow in this world. This creation has been brought about only by ignorance and stupidity. In spite of knowing this, it is indeed strange that this unreal and false non-entity is sought to be strengthened by living beings. This world illusion can be compared to the imagination of the hero who thinks that he is bound by the invisible chains that issue from the eyes of his enemy, and that he is harassed by the invisible army created by the mere thought of the enemy. This world thus conjured up by the non-existent mind is also destroyed by another equally non-existent mind. This illusory world appearance is none other than the mind. He who is unable to understand the true nature of the mind is also unfit for being instructed in the truth expounded in the scripture. The mind of such a person is unable to grasp the subtle truth of the teaching expounded in the scripture. It seems to be satisfied with the illusory world appearance. Such a mind is full of fear. It is afraid of the melodious sound of the veena, and it is even afraid of sleeping relative. It is frightened by hearing someone shout aloud and flees that spot. The ignorant man is completely overcome by his own deluded mind. A man is burnt by his own mind, which is in his heart, which is as virulent as poison, though it is mixed with just a little happiness. He does not know the truth, for he is foolishly deluded by the mind. This indeed is a great mystery. Vasishta continued, my teachings are not meant for those whose intelligence has been silenced by a firm faith in the reality of this illusory world, and the consequent striving for the pleasures of this world. What foolish man will endeavor to show a colorful forest to one who refuses to see? Who will strive to educate that man whose nose has been eaten away by leprosy, in the delicate art of distinguishing different perfumes? Who will instruct the drunkard in the subtleties of metaphysics? Who will make inquiries concerning village affairs from a corpse lying in the crematorium? And if a fool does just this, who can dissuade him from such foolish attempt? Even so, who can instruct that ignorant person who finds it difficult to govern the mind which is dumb and blind? In fact, the mind does not exist, and hence rest assured that it has all the time been conquered. He who finds it difficult to overcome the non-existent mind suffers from the effects of poison he has not taken. The wise man sees the self all the time, and he knows that all movement arises from the movement of the prana. He knows too that the senses perform their respective functions. What then is known as the mind? All motion belongs to prana, and all consciousness belongs to the self, and the senses have each their own power. Which is the one that binds them all together? All motions belongs to the prana, and all consciousness belongs to the self, and the senses have each their own power. So where is the granthi, the knot that binds them all together? All these are indeed aspects of the one infinite omnipotent consciousness. Diversity is a word without substance. How does even the idea of diversity arise in you? What indeed is a jiva but a word which has befuddled the intelligence of people? Even the finite or individualized consciousness is an unreal fancy. What can it do? Seeing the fate of the ignorant people who are suffering because the mind that they have fancied into existence veils the truth which alone exists, I am filled with pity. In this world, fools are born only to suffer and perish. Every day, millions of animals are killed throughout the world. Every day, millions upon millions of mosquitoes are killed by the wind. Every day in the ocean, the big fish eat the small ones. What is there to grieve? The stronger animal kills and eats the weaker animal in this world. From the smallest ant to the greatest of the divinities, all are subject to birth and death. Every moment, countless beings die and countless others are born, totally regardless of whether people like it or not, whether they rejoice or grieve. Hence, it were wiser neither to grieve nor to rejoice over the inevitable. Vasishta continued, he who comes forward to remove the sorrow of a people of perverted intelligence is endeavoring to cover the sky with a small umbrella. They who behave like beasts cannot be instructed, for they are being led like animals by the rope of their own mind. Indeed, even stones shed tears looking at those ignorant people who sink in the mire of their own mind, whose actions spell their own doom. Hence, the wise man does not attempt to teach those who have not overcome their own mind and are therefore miserable in every way. On the other hand, the wise do endeavor to remove the sorrow of those who have conquered their mind and who are therefore ripe to undertake self-inquiry. The mind is not, do not necessarily imagine its existence. If you imagine its existence, then it destroys you, like a ghost. As long as you have forgotten yourself, so long does this imaginary mind exist. Now that you have realized that the mind waxes large by the continued affirmation of its existence, abandon such thinking. When objectivity arises in your consciousness, the latter becomes conditioned and limited. That is bondage. When objectivity is abandoned, you become mindless. That is liberation. Coming into contact with the qualities of nature is conducive to bondage. Abandoning them is the road to liberation. Knowing this, do whatever you please. Realizing I am not and this is not, remain firm and unmoved, like the infinite space. Abandon the impure thought which creates a duality of self-world. In the middle between the self as the seer and the world as the seen, you are the seeing, the sight. Always remain in this realization. Between the experiencer and the experience, you are the experiencing. Knowing this, remain in self-knowledge. When abandoning this self, you think of an object, then you become the mind, and thus become the subject of unhappiness. That intelligence which is other than the self-knowledge is what constitutes the mind. That is the root of sorrow. When it is realized that all this is but the self, there is no mind, no subject, no object, no thinking. When you think, I am the jiva, etc., the mind arises, and with it, the sorrow. When you know I am the self, the jiva and such other things do not exist. The mind ceases to be, and there is supreme bliss. In the light of the truth that all this universe is the self alone, the mind does not exist. Only so long as the serpent of mind is in the body is there fear. When it is removed by the practice of yoga, where is the cause for fear? Vasishta continued, when the self-forgetfully identifies itself with the objects seen and experienced and is thus impurified, there arises the poison of craving. This craving intensifies delusion. Gods like Shiva, etc., may be able to cope with the fires of cosmic dissolution, but it is impossible for anyone to deal with the consuming fire of craving. Whatever terrible sufferings and calamities there are in the world are all the fruits of craving. Remaining unseen and subtle, this craving is yet able to consume the very flesh, bone, and blood of the body. In a moment it seems to subside, the next moment it is in the expanded state. Afflicted by it, man becomes pitiable, weak, lusterless, mean, deluded, miserable, and fallen. When this craving has ceased, one's life force is pure, and all divine qualities and virtues enter one's heart. The river of craving flows only in the heart of the unwise person. Even as an animal falls into a trap on account of its craving for food, a man following the trail of his craving falls into hell. Even the worst blindness of senility is mild in comparison to the blinding delusion which craving brings about in one's heart in the twinkling of an eye. Craving makes one cringe and become small. Even Lord Vishnu became a dwarf when he desired to beg. Hence this craving, which is the source of all sorrows and which destroys the lives of all beings, should be renounced from a great distance. Yet it is on account of craving that the sun shines on earth, the wind blows, the mountains stand, and the earth upholds living being. All the three worlds exist only on account of craving. All the beings in the three worlds are bound by the rope of craving. It is possible to break even the strongest rope in this world, but the rope of craving is hard to break. Therefore, give up craving by giving up thinking or conceptualization. The mind cannot exist without thinking or conceptualization. First, let the image of I, you, and this not arise in the mind, for it is because of these images that hopes and expectations comes into being. If you can thus refrain from building these images, you will also be counted as a man of wisdom. Craving is non-different from the ego sense. Ego sense is the source of all sins. Cut at the very root of this ego sense with the sword of wisdom of the non-ego. Be free from fear. Rama said, Lord, you instruct me to abandon the ego sense and the craving that it gives rise to. If I abandon the ego sense, then surely I should also give up this body and all that is based on the ego sense. For the body and the prana rest on the support of the ego sense. When the root is cut, then the tree, when the root, the ego sense is cut, then the tree, the body, etc. will fall. How is it possible for me to abandon the ego sense yet live? Vasishta replied, Rama, the abandonment of all notions, conditioning, and conceptualization is said to be of two kinds. One is based on knowledge, which is also direct realization, and the other is based on contemplation. I shall describe them to you in detail. One should become aware of one's deluded notion in which one thinks that I belong to these objects of the world and my life depends upon them. I cannot live without them and they cannot exist without me either. Then by profound inquiry one contemplates, I do not belong to these objects nor do these objects belong to me. Thus abandoning the ego sense through intense contemplation, one should playfully engage oneself in the actions that happen naturally, but with the heart and mind ever cool and tranquil. Such an abandonment of the ego sense and the conditioning is known as the contemplative egolessness. When there is knowledge or direct experience of the non-dual truth, one abandons the ego sense and conditioning and entertains no feeling of this is mine, even with regard to the body. This is known as direct realization of egolessness. So one is the contemplative egolessness, the other is the direct realization of the egolessness. He is liberated even while living who playfully abandons the ego sense through the contemplative method. He who uproots this ego sense completely by the direct experience is established in equanimity. He is liberated. Janaka and others like him follow the contemplative method. Others who have direct experience of egolessness are one with Brahman and have risen beyond body consciousness. However, both of them are liberated and both have become one with the Brahman. He is considered a liberated sage who is not swayed by the desirable and the undesirable, who lives in this world and functions, though inwardly totally untouched by the world, as if he is in deep sleep. As the sage Vasishta said this, another day came to an end. The assembly dispersed. Vasishta continued, O Rama, they who have gone above body consciousness are beyond description too. I shall therefore describe to you the nature of those who are liberated while living. The desire that arises in the course of one's natural functions, devoid of craving, is that of a liberated sage. But that desire which is bound up with craving for external objects is conducive to bondage. However, when all ego-based notions are seized in one's heart, the attention that is directed naturally is also the nature of liberated sage. That which is afflicted by contact with external objects is the craving conducive to bondage. The non-volitional desire, which is unaffected by any object, is liberation. That desire which existed even before contact with objects exists even now and forever. It is natural, therefore sorrowless and free from impurity. Such a desire is regarded by the wise as free from bondage. I want this to be mine. When such a craving arises in one's heart, it gives rise to impurity. Such a craving should be abandoned by a wise person by all means at all times. Give up the desire that tends to bondage and the desire for liberation too. Remain still like the ocean, knowing that the self is free from old age and death. Let not these disturb your mind. When the whole universe is realized as illusory, craving loses its meaning. The following four types of feeling arise in the heart of man. I am the body born of my parents. I am the subtle atomic principle different from the body. I am the eternal principle in all the diverse perishable objects in the world. And 4. The I is as also the world or pure void like space. Of these, the first is conducive to bondage and the others to freedom. That is, I am the body born of my parents is conducive for bondage, and all the others, such as I am the subtle atomic principle and the eternal principle, and I am pure void like space, all of them are conducive to freedom. The desires that are related to the first cause bondage. Desires that are concomitant to the other three do not cause bondage. Once the realization that I am the self of all has arisen, one does not again fall into error or sorrow. It is this self alone which is variously described as the void, nature, Maya, Brahman, consciousness, Shiva, Purusha, etc. That alone is ever real, there is nothing else. Resort to the understanding of non-duality, for the truth is non-dual. However, action involves duality and hence functions in apparent duality. Thus, let your nature partake of both duality and non-duality. The reality is neither dual, for it is the mind that creates division, nor unity, for the concept of unity arises from its antithesis of duality. When these concepts cease, dual, non-dual, etc., the infinite consciousness alone is realized to be the sole reality. Vasishta continued, the liberated sage who is disinterested in the events of the past, present, and future looks at the state of the world with amusement, constantly engaged in appropriate action established in the happy medium between extreme and opposite points of views. He dwells unremittingly, rejecting every form of conditioning or intention. He rests in the supreme state of plenitude. Hence, he is not agitated or excited by the events of the world. In all hostilities, he is in the neutral position. Yet, endowed with compassion and consideration for all, he remains unaffected by the world appearance. If he is spoken to, he answers simply and suitably. If not spoken to, he is silent. He seeks nothing and he hates nothing. Thus, he is not afflicted by the world. He says what is good for all, and when questioned, he explains his views convincingly. He knows what is appropriate and what is inappropriate. He is aware of the point of view of other people. He is firmly established in the supreme state, remaining calm and cool in his own heart. He looks at the state of the world amusedly. Such is the state of sages who have reached liberation while yet living in this world. We are unable to expound the philosophy of the fools who have not controlled their own mind and who are immersed in the mire of sense pleasure. They are only interested in conquest, contest, sexual pleasures, and in the acquisition of material wealth. We are also unable to expound the path of rituals and routines which bestow all kinds of rewards in the shape of pain and pleasure. O Rama, live in this world with unlimited vision, having firmly rejected all limitation. Inwardly be free from all desires and hopes, but outwardly do what has to be done. Examine everything and seek only that which is not limited or finite, and live in this world constantly contemplating the infinite. Without entertaining any hope in your heart, yet living as if you are full of hopes, live in this world with your heart calm and cool, behaving outwardly like everyone else. Inwardly give up all notions of I am the doer, yet engage yourself in all activities outwardly. Thus live in this world, completely free from the least trace of the ego sense. There is no bondage and therefore there is no liberation. In truth, this world appearance is essentially unreal and is of the nature of a juggler's trick. The omnipresent, infinite self can never be bound, so how is it to be liberated? All this confusion arises on account of the ignorance of the truth. When the truth is known, this confusion vanishes like the imaginary snake in the rope. Vasishta continued, you are a wise man, Rama. Be firmly established in egolessness and remain unpolluted like space. When the ego is non-existent, how can notions like these are my relatives arise? The self is not involved in such notions, nor in notions of pleasure and pain, good and evil. Be from fear, be free from fear and delusion caused by world appearance. To one who is unborn, there are no relatives or sorrow caused by such relatives. If you realize that you have been someone before and you are someone now and you will be someone later on, and if you realize that this is true even of all these relatives, you will be free from delusion. If you feel that you were before, you are now, but that you will not be hereafter, even then you need not grieve, for that is the end of this world appearance. Hence, it is foolish to grieve here in this world. It is better to be happy at all times and to be ever engaged in appropriate actions. However, yield neither to exultation nor to sorrow, but remain in a balanced state of mind. You are the eternal infinite light, pure and extremely subtle. The world appearance exists, later it will vanish and reappear. But this is only for the ignorant, not for the enlightened. This world appearance has sorrow for its nature. Ignorance expands and aggravates it. But you are wise, therefore be happy. Illusory appearance is none other than illusion. Dream is none other than a dream. All this is the power of the omnipotent, and the appearance is just the appearance. Who is a relative here and to whom? Who is an enemy and to whom? By the wish of the Lord of all beings, all are all to all at all times. This river of relationship is flowing on constantly. What is on top proceeds towards the bottom, and what is below rises up like the cartwheel. They who are in the heaven later go to hell, and they who are in hell go to heaven. They go from one species to another, from one part of the universe to another. The brave become cowards, and cowards become brave. There is nothing in this universe which is unchanging, O Rama. They who were relatives go away after a while. Friend, foe, relative, stranger, I, you are words without corresponding substance. He is friend, and he is not a relative. Such thoughts arise in a mean person. In the magnanimous person, such distinctions does not arise. O Rama, all beings are your relatives, for in this universe there does not exist absolute unrelatedness. The wise know that there is nowhere where I am not, and that is not which is not mine. Thus they overcome limitation or conditioning. End of the story of King Janaka.